Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Progress webinar, the context problem behind installed AI, ROI, why your pilot worked, why your program didn't, and what to build instead. I'm Hinal Patel, a senior product marketing specialist here at Progress, and I'll be your host today for today's session. We're going to be talking about a challenge many organizations face right now. AI pilots can show early promise, but moving from a successful pilot to repeatable production-ready program is where many teams get stuck. This session is about why that happens, what is really holding AI ROI back, and what organizations need to put in place to move forward with more confidence. Before we get started, here's a quick look at today's agenda. We'll begin with introductions and move into the pilot paradox and why strong early AI results often do not translate into production scale. From there, we'll take a look at why context has to come before capability, what it takes to move from pilots to production, and how Progress approaches this challenge. We'll leave time at the end for your questions as well. This is a practical session, so as you listen, I think about where your organization is, maybe seeing gaps between the experimentation and execution phases. Just a quick introduction before we begin. As I mentioned, I'm Hinal Patel, a senior product marketing specialist here at Progress, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. I work closely on messaging and market strategy around Progress Data Platform and how organizations can create more trusted, contextual, and business-focused AI outcomes. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Philip Miller, Product Marketing Director and AI Strategist here at Progress. Phil brings a strong perspective on what it really takes to move AI initiatives beyond the pilot and isolated wins into something scalable, governed, and tied to business impact. In today's session, he'll walk through why the real issue is often not the model itself, but the lack of context, governance, and operational structure around it. I'll also share how organizations can think more strategically about building the right foundation for AI outcomes. With that, I'll hand it over to Phil to get us started.
Thank you very much, Hinal. Let me bring up my screen. There we go. I think everybody can see me now. So, your pilot was never the problem. A lot of people go into AI thinking, what can it do, rather than how can it work in an enterprise organization, right? So we're still seeing stats come out of various analysts and research reports that say that 70 to 90% of enterprise AI projects never reach a production scale. The pilot works, the leadership, will applaud, they'll give you budget, and 6 months later, it's still a pilot. And that's not a team problem, it's probably not a you problem. It's more of a structural problem of how people are approaching their AI initiatives in their business. And the gap between the program and the pilot is really where, unfortunately, your ROI in those tools kind of goes to die. We've talked about this many times in terms of what are the problems and what people are seeing. Yes, we have this fragmented data environment in enterprise organization. Your AI is only seeing a narrow slice of your organization, especially in those limited pilots, right? They're not seeing the full enterprise. They're missing context about your business, the language that you use to describe your world to the AI, right? So their claim might mean one thing in one area. It could mean a completely different thing in a completely different organization in another industry. And the model can't tell that, right? And then there's this bolted on governance. It's kind of like, oh, I'm excited to build this. What can I build, right? In terms of, rather than looking at it as how can I build this in my organization? Rather than looking on at bolted governance, you need to consider that at the very start. And unfortunately, all of these things compound into turning confident LLMs into confidently incorrect answers in your business. And it's, I think, because people are looking at it in the wrong frame, right? Where you start with an AI project isn't necessarily itself with the AI, but actually the human workflow that you're going to insert AI into, and the dependencies on that workflow, which more often than not include data sets that might not necessarily be readily accessible to the AI. And the way I kind of look at this is it's the cost per correct answer, right? So don't look at it as a token or a latency cost or an inference cost. Look at it as how much does it cost to get to the right answer. Think about the compute and the retrieval, the remediation, so the human corrections or even machine corrections that you have to put in there, and that human review. If you add up all of those and divide it by the actual answers that your business can defend, that's the cost of building an AI in your business. And it's not just good enough really to bring wholesale your data environment to the LLM, because again, that probably lacks a contextual lens over that data that's kind of held in our heads, right? So what we take is at the Progress Data Platform level is a semantic enrichment approach, right? You could do this agentically, and we've got a fantastic agentic product that can do that. But at the Progress Data Platform for the large hyperscaled AI organizations, you want to teach your data, or you want to kind of inform your data, build if we get technical, a metadata layer of information about your data before you ask your AI to use it, because your retrieval quality goes up. The hallucinations go down with this approach. Token costs are down. The cost per correct answer goes down, often dramatically. There was an article that was released, I think, last week by, or some research by Gartner, who said that those that invest in a solid data foundation with proper governance and lineage and et cetera, that build this semantic understanding of their data, that put those controls in place for the LLM, will 4x the return of investment against those that don't, right? So it's a substantial increase, and a compounding one when you get further down the line as well. They're using the same models, they're using the same prompts, but they're getting better answers because the data has the context it could never invent on its own. Or if it does, it's going to hallucinate in that invention process, right? So solely relying on AI classification is not always the best approach. It might work for a very limited and publicly available data set, but it might not work for your data that you use proprietary language in, that it isn't publicly available on the internet, hasn't been ingested by LLMs, and simply doesn't understand it. And so it's really taking a more governed agentic AI, right, that uses this data to create the architectural guardrails rather than kind of building on hope. Or we hope that the response is good enough downstream. With agents, that those errors compound significantly, right? In a 100-step process, which isn't unheard of, your even just a 1% error rate will compound to over 60% in terms of errors as a result. And so you want to look at the agent processes, right? So you want to, what's the intent behind the query, the context of the data that you're providing it, and what the candidate action, and that could be your human being or as another agent in that work stream. You want it to be able to evaluate the policy, right? That checks whether the person can have access. So security, role-based or query-based access controls. Boundaries in place, right? So this user has this function, therefore they're able to see this data. And then essentially you want to probably give that workflow and that action a risk score. Is this risk score an appetite that our business is willing to accept? Fine, let's put that into production. If it's not, look back and where can you add more guardrails to this? And then you want to be able to put some sort of decision in there. And that could be a human in the loop, and that's a very legitimate way of doing that. Or it could be an automated decision process. But you need not just that to proceed, but you also then need a halt. If it's drifting, if it's going off course, if it is hallucinating or going in a direction you don't want to go, then you need to be able to understand that. If you then look at, you then log those reasonings, right? And you log the decision-making process, because then you can review that and see whether or not you can make improvements to your workflows ongoing, right? And all of this, by the way, should have an audit trail. If you're in an enterprise organization, there's very few of those that aren't regulated in some way, shape, or form, that don't have to adhere to international or national standards, that don't have to present data to regulators on a regular basis, explaining their actions and why they do this. The lineage, provenance, and governance of the decisions that your AI and you make with your data in that human workflow are incredibly important. And if you can't show the regulator, why did you classify this data? What does this data mean in the context of this decision that it's made? And can you repeat that action, importantly, to prove that it's governed? Then you're very quickly run afoul of regulators. And I talk about making AI boring, right? And the boring bit in this layer is the thing that makes the AI work, right? You've got applications and agents sitting on top of your data, and you've got source and systems sitting below your data. Often it's the demo that everybody sees and the data that nobody can find in the background, right? Or understand or have the context of, right? Your governed contextual layer in your business, the data platform that you build your applications and AI, agentic AI on top of, needs that unified data lens for that particular use case. It needs the semantic meaning behind that data for that use case, the governance and orchestration for that use case. All told, it needs to be able to understand, have the context, our human context of the world, expressed to the machine. We build on a platform because it makes it then easier for you and your future applications to learn more about your business, to learn more context, to increase the understanding of its world, and therefore increasing the applications and services that you're able to build on top of that using agentic AI or AI. We then have the difference between the kind of questions you should be thinking about in your head, right? Okay, what's the first dimension? Okay, what's the output? Okay, that's impressive, that's great, but is it defensible? If a regulator came to me and said, can I make a decision again and get the same result, can you defend that? Or can you articulate or infer with a high level of accuracy why the AI made the decision it made with your data? AI is still very much a black box, but we can provide it with enough context and understanding that when it comes out again, it's showing us where it got the answers from. Retrieval-augmented generation is a part of that workflow, right? It's the generation part of the retrieval-augmented generation and the augmentation part that shows people where they got that source information. And if you've used a semantic enrichment approach, that classification and the decisions the AI makes in terms of what data it's chosen from, you can defend, because you can say, well, human beings review these rules, right? We have accuracy. Is it accurate? Well, sometimes, right? We already know that if it's a 1% inaccuracy in a 100 workload, it's over 60%. So we need to make sure that we are in the very high 90s. And, you know, a lot of our customers are in 95 to 99% accuracy. In some customers, they won't accept anything less than 100% in certain use cases. So we need to make sure that we can get explainable answers that are accurate as well. What's the scope? You know, people look at building point solutions and then go and create essentially another data silo in their business. What you should be looking for is a governed platform that you can build multiple different use cases on, that you can build multiple different layers of understanding contextually, whether it's at the user level, whether you've got, decompartmentalization underneath that user so you can see a wider lens and build more applications, or whether it's governed in terms of the output that the AI has given us. Cost, right? How much does it cost to create these things? A lot of people, I bet people don't know in terms of tokens how much it costs AI to read a PDF. But there's just been some research that's come out that if you were to read if the AI reads a PDF that you give it, which is a standard thing for most people to do, we hand out PDFs as white papers that are 15 pages long, then that AI will spend 3,000 tokens reading that PDF. If you've taken a more AI first approach and supply it with MD files, that could be as low as 200 tokens. So just by improving parts of your process and how you present and what information you give to the AI can have a measured impact on the correct answer cost, right? And then it's also looking at reframing the way you look at governance in your business. Constraint is the mother of innovation, right? Invention it comes from sometimes limitations that we have. And that's how to present governance in the business, right? It's getting people to understand, I'm not hampering you with this. I'm just providing you a safe platform from which you can build, right? And then that platform becomes that velocity layer. Because now I can say, well, I can share this across the business. It's my marketing information, say, for instance. I can share this right across the business, and I can start building out different functional applications that might work for our demand generation teams or our sales teams or our production teams or our project management teams, right? It becomes a race then for innovation, right? And you can see that in the AI providers, right? Once they've got the right approach, they can start innovating and start rapidly releasing new technologies and new features. What does it mean in the real world? I've talked about lots of times different customer use cases. Regulated services. Let's take claims triage with a defensible audit trail, right? Every decision that it's made is tied back to a policy. That's semantic enrichment. We tie that back to a policy. And when the AI orders ask why, the system can answer, right? If we look in pharma and life sciences, in a clinical documentation intelligence, right? The semantic classification across protocols, CSRs, submissions mean that the retrieval, the answers that the AI is getting from the human being, as in what trial do you want me to have a look at, are correct. But also then the answers from the AI is also using that grounded source of information as well. Financial services with policy-aware advisor assists, right? Every answer grounded in an approved source. Nothing's invented, nothing is out of bounds. If it is, there's guardrails in place to catch those out of bounds and then either requery or change the output before it gets to a customer sensitive or process sensitive part of your business. But the pattern is the same, right? It's a governed context layer in your business. It is policies and things that we understand as human beings. We get training and we get new policies that come out and read human readable documents that we understand what that implication is if we do something wrong. The machine doesn't, right? So express those policies as code in your system. And then have that audit trail on by default. You need to be able to show a temporal view of the decisions that your application makes in your business in order to be able to, one, keep guard, keep watch, right? Make sure you're going back and reviewing those transactions and those changes to make sure it was correct. Two, to then almost go open book with the regulator and say, we've got nothing to hide here. This is what happened. Or when somebody says, okay, can you repeat that particular transaction? Then you've got the data behind that the AI use, so you can then show them that, yes, I can repeat that result time and time again. And I want to make this practical for people. So, like today, for the 5 questions that I would be asking my colleagues and people, is like, what's our cost per correct answer, not token, right? Because the correct answer is often worth much more than token cost, even if you're using the latest and greatest model, right? It's much more valuable in the business to improve a workflow for an hour for 1,000 people than it is, it costs us an extra 20 tokens, right? That's not a consideration. You should be looking at what's the correct answer or outcome. Does our retrieval policy respect the policy in our business, the governance, the security, the before it respects relevance? What that really means is, should the user or the AI have access to this information? If the answer is no, then you've got to set up guardrails in your business to prevent that leaking. Right? And so it's the same as hiring somebody and giving them a certain level of user access. Same thing with AI, right? It shouldn't have access carte blanche. You should be controlling that. But you should be controlling that through policies as code. Can we defend a single AI output for the auditor this week, right? Can I say, I know the data it used, I know why it used it because it's got that human classification in there. So I can infer with a high confidence and match that with the machine confidence that this is why it gave this answer. And here's, by the way, I can repeat that. Is your governance in code or is it still in Excel, right? So let's get that expressed to the machine rather than in some source document that the AI takes a while to read. Are we optimizing for the model or are we optimizing for the context, right? If we're optimizing for the model, well, then you're only going to have a short shelf life, right, with that application, because that model will change. They will change how that model works, and various different levers that they can pull on the system side of how publicly available models work. And it won't be the latest and greatest. What you should be building for is the context of the use case, both to the machine and to the data that's going to power that. Our customers today are using the Progress Data Platform to build out an AI-ready data platform in their business. They are taking advantage of our multi-model approach to data, our semantic enrichment of that data, and then our policy by code feature in that platform so that they can create modern platforms where you can build multiple different applications rather than point solutions. So, these are some of the top 5 use cases across the enterprise at the moment. We can start off agentically if you've got smaller use cases or departmental level use cases that are mainly internal. We can use Progress Agentic RAG in your business to accelerate the development of those. But if that needs to scale, we can actually provide that semantic RAG version in the Progress Data Platform, which is already proven to scale out into the kind of petabytes and millions of users, right? So it can handle this scale in a governed, safe fashion. We talked about this. This is really a visualization of what we've been talking about, very simplified, right? The user or agent makes a query. It goes into the Progress Data Platform. We interpret that query using that classification, taxonomies and ontologies, essentially data about the data, the language of that data. We augment what is relevant. And again, this is where we lower that token usage. We don't need to give it the whole document. We can give it .md files as a preference, say, for instance, rather than raw PDFs. And then we augment that to the user's query. And we can then govern that as a whole rather than in parts to see whether the combination of that information shouldn't be shared with the AI or with the user. And then we send it to the AI with that contextualization. We govern that on the way out. We validate it again by looking into our data platform, by going through and making sure that it's quoting the right sources, it's doing inline sourcing, and then we annotate that to the response. and we pass it downstream for answer or action. And I say action because it could be in a multiple different agent downstream actions. The way we look at this is, in when we're trying to evaluate where businesses are, if authentically or if they want to go straight to the platform. So we kind of look at this in a kind of 4 stages of agentic AI growth, especially in enterprise organizations, right? So you might have a team that's just getting started on AI and making their data AI ready, right? But they're focused on a very specific use case that leverages unstructured data. Okay, fine, we can do that. Now they're getting answers not only from the unstructured data, but they're also sourcing answers from other sources as well, right? Using that reasoning engine that's built in. But if then you need to scale and you need extra governance and security, and the list goes on in some cases, right? Then you're going to need an agentic data foundation. You're going to need a tool like Progress Data Platform that allows you to connect your knowledge applications inside your business and outside your business into an agentic foundation for those specific use cases. And then we can then scale that out across the organization. So we can connect those applications into a wider enterprise agentic knowledge platform and share that additional context and understanding of the business, and essentially then grow with that compound trust that you have in the tool. Recently, our approach, we talked about it at the beginning with that 4x, if we do this approach, and we've started to get some recognition here from both our peers who are leaving reviews on Gartner Peer Insights, from ISG with recent 3 different reports where we were ranked exemplary in their quadrants. And you can download those full reports here as well. I think there's going to be a link that'll be dropped into the chat. Our approach is different, right? It is, it's not flashy, it's boring, and people are hating me for this, right? But it's because we're going to do the work with our customers, with our partners, to make sure that the platform that you're delivered is governed, grounded, and defensible every single time that you go to call on it. And so from there, you can start building out this trusted, governed, outcome-driven AI in your business. Lots of information in there. There's the white paper and so on and so forth. I think we might have some questions. So let me stop sharing my screen and let's bring Hanal back on, we'll call it stage.
Thank you, Phil, for taking us through the webinar, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We will now be heading into the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A panel on the right-hand side, and we'll get started on the first question. So the first question we have today is, we have multiple AI pilots running across different business units, each using different data sources. Where do you actually start when the fragmentation is that widespread?
Yeah, so the way that I would approach an organization kind of asking me this question and with our technology is to not actually start from the technology. It's actually to start from the human workflows that you're trying to address, right? The business challenges, the use cases, the outcomes that you're trying to deliver, and then look at those human workflows and see where there is a repeatable, maybe transactional task within that workflow that AI can track that time to delivery. So we've done it with certain customers where in a content creation workflow, they have a research process, and it's a very deep research process. They go out and look at all of the incoming legislations and regulations that are coming into XYZ industry, say, for instance. And the best way to then help them there is to then create an AI agent that will go out and research and pull in information that is relevant to that use case, right? And to the content. And that alone would save them 4 hours worth of work and was able to contract that time to value. But in the process of doing that, what you're actually doing is creating a load of rules that will persist beyond that initial use case, because hopefully, ideally, you're using the Progress Data Platform, right? So you can take that platform, and with those rules, the governance, the security, even brand guidelines and things like that you've already programmatically expressed for that initial use case, you can then take that to the next use case, and that will save literally hours worth of work on every use case you build. The other great thing is, by doing that and that approach, you're able to build on the context about your business for the next use case, because there might be data or insights or relationships in your initial use case that you can then bring into the subsequent use case downstream. Right. So this is what we talk about, that compounding effect, that Gartner report that mentions that 4x saving. That's what they mean by doing this data prep work in your organization. And ultimately, then you can start shutting down as well disparate data sources that are no longer used or no longer needed. Right. So, yeah, that's kind of the approach that I would take.
Thanks, Phil. The second question we have are, how are metrics and audits developed and implemented for model responses?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got you can do it manually, right? So you could have somebody manually check all of the answers that you have in your business. Does it reach a certain bar? Yes, it does. If it's a very sensitive use case, that might be the approach that you want to do, right? Sensitive, complex, but low output, right? Let's get a human being in there to make sure that this is correct. Okay, fine. That's that human in the loop approach. But we also can take a hybrid approach to this. So we've got a tool under the Progress Data Platform called Progress Agentic RAG. And specifically, we have a tool called REMI, which is RAG Evaluation Metric Indicators. And basically, it looks at the responses from the LLMs versus your content, and then gives it an accuracy, a groundedness, and there's another metric in there as well, about the responses. And you can track that change over time. So as you increase the volume of data that you have, add additional classification rules, you can very quickly see how your responses are differing and changing and increasing or decreasing in action. We also have another tool underneath the Progress Data Platform, which is a business rules engine. And so what that does is that allows you to take the policies and maybe the regulations and legislations that affect your business, and programmatically apply them as rules to your data, to the AI, right, to control its inputs, actions, and outcomes. Right. And so that's sort of the approach that we would take. Again, we would look at it at the frame of what matters to the outcome and use case that you have. Right. Because that's then, is it this just an internal system that's departmental level? Then it might just be the agentic approach. Is it really safe and secure and needs to be maintained? That might be a human. Or is it somewhere in between? And so we can use that kind of hybrid approach, that hybrid intelligence of bringing the human and the AIs together.
Great time for this question, because the next question we have is about RAG as well. So The next question is, we're seeing good results with RAG in one use case, but every new use case feels like starting from scratch. How do you make the second and third use cases faster than the first?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the thing, is that a lot of people are building out these, spinning up vector databases or whatever in their businesses in silo, right? What you should be trying to do is trying to create a core AI-ready data platform in your business, right? So that you can share the rules, regulations, governance, lineage, policy, user access, brand guidelines, the list goes on, of what matters to you in your business to the machine. And once you've shared them once, they can be applicable to multiple different use cases, right? And so that can really accelerate your RAG implementation. We can also help you with creating more complex classification rules for your data for that specific use case to get more specific answers. Using a UI-based approach to classification, we can now offer access to subject matter experts, business experts in the business, to what would traditionally be data engineers. Role of classifying this data and building out roles. But because it's UI driven, it's very intuitive for a business users to go, oh, look, I have all of these rules. Now I can apply them to my data. We also use AI in that process. And so you're able to get the AI to suggest certain classifications. And again, what we found is even when we've used AI for 400 different classifications with a customer, with just 2 subject matter experts, they were able to go through those 400 suggestions, essentially disregard half, and then keep 200, 205, I think it was, classification types against their data. And that improved their accuracy significantly. It moved the needle from the 80s into the 90s, right? And so that approach is much more dynamic. I think that approach is more scalable for the organization. And then hopefully what you'll be able to do is find this 4x value that Gartner's talking about when you're looking at the return on investment.
One last question we have here is, what's the difference between bolting governance onto an AI system after the fact versus building it from the start? Is it really that different in practice?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's very similar theme for all these questions, but it's build once, use many times. I'm not building a point solution, and you shouldn't look at these things as point solutions because they just create more silos within your business, right? It's just as important for the sales team to have access to the marketing documentation as it is as important for the marketing team to have access to the product documentation and legal team to have access to that customer contracts, and the list goes on, right? Your business doesn't operate in silos. It operates through the connective tissue that is, at the moment, in large part, for still a lot of businesses, the human, right? We have implicit knowledge in our head about the governance and controls that we can use with our data. So by doing this at a platform level and then bringing those applications to bear against that platform, I don't have to spend half a day, 2 hours, however long it takes for your security review to go through and say, oh, this is correct, this is fine, because it knows underneath these are all the rules. We know the AI is not going to get access to any of this data. We know that the outcomes are going to be measured. We know that the incoming data is going to be, secure for the user and so on and so forth. There's probably always still elements of your workflow that might require some one-on-one or one-to-one work. But by building out the core of your platform, by getting all of the rules and regulations that matter to you, you're able to offset that work and really kind of go, well, actually, I can move quickly with this because I have a platform that is accurate, reliable, and trustworthy. And that's why some of our initial customers have gone on to build microservices platforms on top of the thing, because they're now able to kind of share this with their business and say, hey, come along and build what matters to you.
Thanks, Phil, for the Q&A. This wraps up our Q&A portion. If you have any other questions, please reach out to Phil or I or the Progress team. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you for the questions, and look forward to seeing you again soon.